Here I am back in the workshop, and as I stated in my previous video, I'm working on the rear axle. So what you can see before you is effectively the outer edges of the axles. So that basically consists of a block, and you can see the block I've made here. This is where the drive shaft goes in. On this particular vehicle, it's driven by a gear wheel which drives on internal gears, which would actually sit in there. So there's a gear wheel sits in there and it drives the hub. So the actual drive shaft is off center from the axle for the rear wheel. So, and that's what you can see here. In essence, this is where the drive shaft would go in. I'm not going to replicate the drive mechanism with gears and cogs and whatever. And this is where the rear stub axle for the back wheel would go. And then on top of that, we've got a piece on the back, which you can see here. It's actually a towing eye, I believe. Anyway, it's on the vehicle, and I will replicate it. This piece down here is actually where the cross member, which joins the two halves, joins the two back plates together, goes. So it's not unusual on Dion models that they have a shaft which is going out of the vehicle, a bit like that. It's actually got a kink in it to avoid the differential, and that's what holds these two back plates together. So I've yet to make this component. I'll be getting onto that shortly. And then on the top, I have to put in 4 studs because the rear spring is actually attached to this as well. So this will attach to the rear spring, and I also have to make a back plate, and we'll be doing that over the next few days, together with the associated nuts and bolts that have to go on this. What I have done is I've made these components. So that component will go in there, and there is a gaiter, so the drive shaft would come out here normally, and there is a gaiter that go between the two. I haven't figured exactly how I'm going to simulate the drive shafts, but I'll be working on that. Given that this is a static component, I may just fabricate some drive shafts that don't move. So that's where I am today, and I'll get back to you when I've got a little bit more progress to report. So here's an overview of the parts that I have had to make in order to create the rear axle and spring. So let's start off with the spring. So there's a spring. This is a 9-leaf spring. As you can see, it's the springs are actually shorter, the long ones at the top. On the end here, I've just put a piece of brass tube to act as the spring hanger point. So that's one of the springs. The second component I made, which you have seen earlier, was this component in the center here, which is the main components of the drive system in the axle. So as I mentioned earlier, this particular vehicle is driven by a gear wheel which would sit in here. I'm not going to make it, and then would drive gears that sit on the outside of the hub. But this is one side of that. There's then a small piece which is used to hold the wheel on, and then I've got the braking mechanism which I've manufactured. So as you can see here, it's basically a brake band. This is secured to the axle block through these nuts here, and then as you can see, as you pull it forward, the band actually tightens on this little mechanism at the top here. So you can see that. So if I move that, the band will tighten, and there's an adjuster, and this is the operating lever. And then there's a top block to hold the spring on. There's a few components to hold the spring on the back of the axle. So in the front of the axle, it's actually fixed. It's fixed to a fixed point, and at the rear of the axle, then it's basically the spring is swinging to allow movement. And here actually is one that is completed and on a wheel. So as you can see here, if you watch, you can see the brake mechanism actuating. Needs adjustment at the moment, but it does lock the brakes. This is the rear axle joining tube. In here goes the drive shaft, which I'm going to start working on shortly. And that's it. I mean, the next thing to do basically is to strip all of this down and to put a coat of etch primer on it, and that's one of the things I'll be doing the next day or two. And just to show you, actually I've completed both sides, so I've got both of these now ready for the next step, which will be to put them on the chassis. Well, what I've just done is I've assembled the springs and rear axles on the chassis, as you can see here. Quite a bit of intricate. This is not fixed yet, I'll fix that later on. There's still going to be quite a bit of fettling and other bits and pieces to do to this, so I won't bother fixing this until I'm close to completion, just before I get into painting the chassis. So there it is. That's the total assembly. You can see there, sitting on the chassis, ready for. I'll just move that a little bit so you can get a better view. Ready for the next phase, which will be putting the drive shafts in and mounting the rear differential when I've finished it.